Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Getting back to work on the Sig 227 in this video. Last video I went through and did some minor polished cleanup work on all of the lower frame parts. Now is my time to do the reassembly of the firearm. First thing I'm going to do is the actual frame itself. I need to clean it out. There's a little bit of dust and debris in here, so I'm going to go ahead while this is completely assembled and get all of the nooks and crannies cleaned and ready for reassembly. All right, and went through with some patches and some super quick clean gun, also a Q-tip, a couple Q-tips just to clean out some areas where there was like old grease and lint, stuff like that. So all cleaned out, good to go. I went over all the surfaces. You can see it's still a little shiny with that super quick clean gun because it is a micro penetrant. So it'll just help from crap sticking and whatnot in the future. Makes it easier to clean and whatnot. So that is now ready to go. So now it's going to be time to start the reassembly. All right, so first up is going to be the hammer. So I grabbed the hammer and the hammer pin. I'm going to go over this first with a little bit of super quick clean gun, just wipe it down, just because again that is a rust inhibiting penetrant, so that's good for the metal. And then I'll go ahead and put a little grease on each side of the hammer, put it in its space in there, and then the pin goes through that hole right there. All right, you can see the hammer is in place, a little bit of grease on it, and the pin is in position. Next thing is going to be to grab the ejector, because you're going to have to walk the first hole of it on that pin there and then kind of walk it in next to the hammer. You could have put it in before the hammer if you wanted to, but you can also do it right now. So I'm going to go ahead and grab that, walk it into place, and I'll be back once that's done. All right, and here you can see the ejector's in place. The first hole goes on that pin there, and then you kind of drop it in next to the hammer, and then you should be able to see straight through the second hole, because that is where the pin for the sear goes, and the sear is going to be the next thing. So I'm going to grab the sear pin, and the spring, as well as the safety. All right, you can see the sear right there. The spring is sitting in the housing where it goes. Put a little grease on this side because that is where the safety lever is going to sit on top of it. And then I have the pin right there as well. So the safety lever will sit like this, and you'll drop this into place, and it will line up with the hammer. I know it's kind of a lot. You have to walk it in and upward because the tab of that spring is going to push up against that pin right there. So you're going to have to, it's kind of convoluted. You have to angle it into place, all as one unit, and then run the pin through. It's almost better to run the pin in from this side if you can, and then catch the sear first, and then you can get the safety lever in there. But whatever works best for you. But that is the general process. Again, you'll need to make sure the sear catches the hammer. You're probably gonna have to have the hammer in a forward position like this as much as possible to make your life easier. So I'm gonna go ahead and get that taken care of. All right, here you can see the pin is in somewhat. It's holding the sear as well as the spring in there, but the spring is not in its final position. I'm going to do that after everything is located. Next thing I need to do is drop the safety in there in between the sear and the frame, and then I can run the pin the rest of the way through. All right, and there you can see the safety lever is in and the pin is all the way through both sides, and that's how everything orients. So the last thing you do is just use like a flathead screwdriver or something, and just that tab of the spring that's sticking up there, it needs to be moved downward and then underneath the pin that's sticking through. So go ahead and get that put in place. All right, and there it is, spring is in place. I just used a pair of needle nose pliers, it was a little bit easier. And then you should be able to go ahead and pull the hammer back like so, and the sear will lock it, and it stays locked back. And then I can't do it right now, but if you were to pull forward on that safety lever with a pair of pliers or a screwdriver, it'll release the sear from the hammer, and the hammer will go back forward. So that is it as far as that portion goes. Next is going to be the trigger assembly. All right, one thing I did forget to mention is when you're putting the hammer in, there's that spring that's already going to be in the frame. You do want to make sure that that arm of that spring is sitting on top of the pin that's in the hammer assembly, because you want it to keep it from going all the way forward. So like if you were to release the safety there like so, and the safety you know, like when you pull the trigger, it's going to go all the way forward, right? But if you're off the trigger, you want that spring putting pressure and keeping the hammer off of the firing pin. So you should feel that spring pushing the hammer backward instead of forward. And then you'll have the main spring, when that's put back in, that will put the forward pressure on the hammer. So just a little clarification there before I start putting the trigger in. Alright, so here's the trigger assembly, and I already went over everything with a little bit of super quick clean gun, like I said, and a little bit of grease on the bar that goes into the trigger itself. Best way to get this in is actually kind of come in backwards and twist it around like this, because you have to get that tab that you see there behind the safety bar there. So you'll kind of come in through the top, this angle, spin it around with the trigger folded up, and then you can drop it down into in through the hole appropriately and have everything lined up ready for the locking block. So I'm going to go ahead and get that installed. Alright, you can see the bar in place there, how it kind of sits in place, as well as the trigger is pretty much where it needs to be for the pin to go through. But before you do that, you do need to put in the locking block as well as the slide catch, because again, you know, the spring for the slide catch is attached to the locking block, and then the pin that goes through the trigger and this is also part of the locking block assembly. So you can put the pin in now if you wanted to, or you can put it in after the locking block's in place, your choice. But you'll definitely need to have, you know, this on the pin first. So it's kind of, you know, dealer's choice on how you want to do it. I'll probably go ahead and put the pin in first. Remember, those tabs have to be upward because those hook into the two arms of the locking block. Alright, so a couple things. In case I forgot to mention, I did put a little grease there. You can see on the other side of the trigger bar, and then also the arm that comes around that catches on the back of the safety lever. Put a little bit on there as well. And you can see the pin is in place for the trigger. There's a side that has texture on it. That goes on this side there. You can see the texture. And then I also did put the slide stop on the pin as it was going through. So next is going to be to go ahead and walk the locking block into place. The two arms of the locking block will fit in those grooves there, and again, you see the flat spots in the pin. Those sit into, those seat in the locking block. So you may have to spin the pin a little bit just to get everything lined up perfectly, but that is how you'll get the locking block into place. Alright, locking block is in place, and again, you may have to do a little like manipulating of that pin, spinning it, just to try and get it lined up ever perfect. But this will come in at like an angle, downward angle, coming backward ever so slightly, and it'll eventually, this side will go down, and then you should be able to get the front end down as well, and the pin will spin with it. But that is the orientation that the pin should be when everything is in place. And then also, if you hold down on the locking block and push up on the side lock, you'll feel the spring resistance. So make sure that that is all lined up where it's supposed to be. So now that that's in, next on the list is going to be the takedown lever. And if you remember, if you watched the teardown video, you just kind of have to angle it in at the right angle, because you'll see the spring that holds it in place there. You have to walk it over that, and it's got on the end that goes in, that flat spot there. So you kind of have to put it over that and just walk it into place to get it where it needs to go. So I'm going to go ahead, get it started, and get everything worked into place, and just work around the different detents, because you can see the detent there where it'll eventually live once it's all the way in. All right, and there you can see takedown lever is in place, so things are starting to feel a lot more like they should. Next on the list is going to be the trigger spring. Let me get that put into place. So let me grab that real quick. All right, so here's the trigger spring. This end here goes into the hole right here in the frame. You just kind of have to walk it in place like so and get it seated. And once it's in there, this hook here hooks into that little notch there on the trigger bar. So you just kind of have to bend it a little bit, and it should seat itself just like that. So there is the trigger spring in place. All right, next up is going to be the hammer strut. I'm going to put a little grease on this end where it seats into the hammer, and it's basically just going to go through this hole here. You'll feel sit in the base of the hammer there, and then you just need to put a little upward pressure on it and get the retainer hooked into those notches there on the back of the frame. All right, and then here you can see the hammer spring assembly is all installed. Make sure you get this strut in the right notch in the hammer. You'll feel the center notch that it has to go into, but it's going to want to try and go a little forward on the hammer. You need to make sure you get it in the notch in the back, because if you don't, when you pull the trigger like this, the hammer's not gonna come forward. So you need to have it in that back notch so it is doing what it's supposed to do and firing the firearm. Like I said, if you don't have it in the right notch, you're gonna pull the trigger and the hammer's gonna stay back. It's not gonna come springing forward. So you can kind of see there what it should look like through that window, roughly where the hammer will engage the strut for the spring assembly. All right, and then the last mechanical bit we need to install is the decock lever. So that is going to have this back plate that goes on the other side of the frame, and you can see the two holes that it goes into there and there. And once that's inserted from the back, you go ahead and put the lever down. That prong or that tab goes through the hole in the lever, and then you'll go ahead and the spring will seat. That flat edge there goes in the groove there, and then this tab there goes into the hole on the lever right there. So basically put your finger in from the back to kind of hold that plate in. It's going to be the easiest way, probably from the top, and then you can lay the bar in place and then get the spring seated. I'll be back once it's done. All right, real quick, everything's in place. I've got my finger holding that back plate in place through the top. So now this is the orientation you want the spring to be in, and then just grab a pair of pliers, drag that end and hook it into that hole right there. And there it is installed. And as you can see, I did put some grease on the back of the lever just, to keep it operating nice and smooth. All right, and last thing I want to do before I put the grip on is just kind of walk through the operation of the firearm, how everything works mechanically. You can see I did put a magazine in there, and it's basically just to hold that back plate in place, or well, to help keep the spring from popping off when I'm using that and everything. Because once the grip's on, it does hold everything where it's supposed to be. But if you mess with the decock lever and there's no grip, the spring can pop off. So anyway, as far as the function goes, this is a dual action / single action firearm. So you can have the hammer not cocked, and if you pull through the trigger, it will fire that way. So I just kind of wanted to show so you can see everything, how it operates as far as the trigger bar and all of the mechanism. The trigger bar itself, you can see there, it is pulling on the bottom of the hammer where it sticks through if the hammer is not cocked. So that's why you do want to put some grease in that area, both on the frame here and on the inside of that tang on the back of the trigger bar where it wraps around and catches the back of the hammer. That's just going to help with nice smooth action. So as you pull the trigger, you can see it pulling the hammer through that window there, and then it releases. Now same thing, if you have a cocked trigger's already back, the sear is on it, as you can see in there, holding everything in place. And then when you pull the trigger, there's the nice crisp action. It basically just pulls on the safety bar and releases everything. Speaking of the safety bar, that is sticking up right there, and you can see it next to the sear. The way that works is when we get to the slide, you'll see that there is a firing pin safety. As you pull the trigger, it pushes up on that safety bar. You see it there moving up, and that is what will push in on that firing pin safety to allow the firing pin to go through and fire. Now you see it's down when this is in dual action, when the hammer is not cocked. I want to show you real quick. If you cock the hammer manually, that pops up. So it will be up ever so slightly when you cock the hammer. Now granted, the spring pressure should push it back down, so it shouldn't cause it to be no longer drop safe, but just something to think about. I'll release it. You can see how much further down it is there versus when the hammer was cocked. We'll show you again. And I'll push down on it to make sure it's just not, up from the pressure, but it is a little bit higher there versus when the hammer is released and there's downward pressure on it. So just something to think about. So anyway, that is kind of the operation, how everything works. You know, basically as you pull the trigger bar back, it just releases the sear, which then releases the hammer, which has the 2 steps in it. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab the grips, and then we can go ahead and get the grips installed, and that'll wrap up this video. All right, so here is the grip assembly. And the way I'm gonna install this is I'm gonna come up from the bottom on the back just to kind of spread this out a little bit because it's tight to get over everything, and then carefully walk it forward. Now you want to keep a few things in mind. You want to make sure that this side goes over that spring and tucks properly within these 2 levers here. And then same thing on the other side. You want to make sure it doesn't interfere, doesn't pop out the trigger spring that is here. So you need to make sure that everything goes in as it's supposed to and tucks behind the grip module. So just be very careful and be slow as you're installing this, and everything should get into place just fine. And then these tabs here will lock into the frame in these notches there. And just stopping real quick to show you, like I said, you walk it up from the bottom and just kind of make sure it goes over everything as it should and isn't causing anything to pop out of place. And then you can go ahead and push it forward the rest of the way. Again, just be careful with the 2 operation levers there on this side. All right, and there it is, grip module completely reinstalled, seated in place. And you'll just want to make sure everything functions properly. Good there. Nice break there. And then also make sure your decock works as it should, and that you've got free movement and the spring tension on your slide release. Didn't do anything with the magazine release, so that should be working properly. But yeah, that is it. Everything is good and complete with the lower. You should have a nice trigger pull and be happy with it. Definitely nice and smooth from what I can feel there. Nice clean break. Very happy with the results. So that is it as far as reassembling the frame. All right, and that's where I'm gonna end this one. Next video, I will pick up with disassembling the slide completely, because we're gonna do all the same work on all the components of the slide. So if you like what you're seeing, you wanna follow along, please hit like, please hit subscribe, please hit the notification bell. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comment section below. I do review them, I will reply. I do have a second YouTube channel devoted to automotive stuff. If that is something that interests you, please check it out. There's a link in the description of this video. I also have a Rumble channel where I'm posting my firearm content. If you're on Rumble, I'd appreciate it if you would subscribe to my channel. There's a link in the description of the video as well. That being said, thank you very much for watching, and have a great day.